Today we're going to talk about one more play from Shakespeare before we leave him. We thought we ought to talk about a comedy, and we chose As You Like It.
We probably didn't finish Hamlet, but that's all right.
Yeah. No, we didn't.
We said enough about it.
Yeah, I think we said.
And we're not, after all, as we've said many times, we're not operating a guided tour. That's not our purpose. We're not taking you through Hamlet, scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, this is what's here, and that's what's there. We're rather saying, look, this is what it's all about. And the rest of it is good reading. The remark I made when Mr. Quinn showed up this afternoon was, gee, this play is better than Hamlet, which is a wry remark, because the world would certainly not say that, and I suppose I wouldn't say it either if I were in my right mind. Hamlet is considered to be the greatest play that Shakespeare ever wrote. Everybody thinks that, I think. And most people think that tragedy is superior to comedy anyway, and that As You Like It is a delightful play, but certainly it wouldn't be ranked as one of his greatest. I don't suppose it would even be ranked as one of his greatest comedies.
I think so.
Would it? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
It in Twelfth Night, I
yeah,
suppose,
I suppose
would be
you're right.
the two greatest comedies. Although
It's
some people have spoken, Samuel Johnson spoke very, very well of Shakespeare's comedies.
Yes,
he loved
he did.
Shakespeare's comedies, yeah. And,
well, we've talked about this before. It's a great question. Which is superior, tragedy and comedy? As we've said, speaking about modernism and the modern world, modernism is tragedy. That's what it is. It's a version of the tragic spirit. There was a modernist Spanish writer who wrote a book called The Tragic Spirit, very influential in our time. Wasn't Ortega?
Unamuno, yeah.
It was Miguel Unamuno, an enormously influential document, The Tragic Spirit, and very well documented.
Mm-hmm.
The only question you raise is that the greatest effort of the human mind? Well, maybe it is the greatest effort of the human mind. It has no grace. But Christianity is common. The tragic spirit is anti-Christian. I don't know whether we pointed this out or not, but as soon as Constantine established the Catholic Church, tragedy was forbidden. Tragedy went out. As soon as the church got power enough to suppress it, there was no tragedy. Now, I suppose there are some people who say, well, yeah, there was no comedy either. That is, the theater itself was suppressed. And to some extent that's true, because comedy in the ancient world was a rather licentious affair.
From Rome, it had a very bad name.
Yeah. An actress was a prostitute. It was identified with that sort of thing. But it's not true. That is, during the Middle Ages, there was a rousing amount of comedy in circuses and traveling players and in poetry and in recitations and so forth. But tragedy doesn't come back until the church loses its grip.
Yeah, well, and of course there
with the Renaissance.
There were plays that came along in the Middle Ages. They were
the mysteries, you mean?
The mystery plays. They were religious plays, but a lot of them had an awful lot of the comics. They had the comic spirit, and some of them are really very, very funny.
Comic doesn't mean that it isn't serious.
No.
Some of them had a high seriousness, but always with a comic.
Yeah, well, we were. I'm sure at the time that we were talking about the Bible, it seemed to me we talked about those plays like Noah, where Noah's wife argues with him. She's a harridan, and she comes out and she argues with him. She says, "This is a foolishness for you to be building this boat. Here we are, that it isn't even raining. What are you doing? What are you talking about?" And you say, "God came and told you to do that. Don't be a fool. You must have been drunk," she says. She just goes on and on on. It's very, very funny. It sounds just like Chaucer, you know. It's
Yeah.
a little earlier than Chaucer, or about the same time,
same
but
time,
same,
same
exactly
spirit.
the same kind of thing. And the most famous of all the plays, the Second Shepherd's Play, or most well known of them, it's about
The Nativity.
The Nativity. But the whole
Solemn
play,
subject.
the whole play is about these shepherds who are and this rascal who's a thief and who has stolen a sheep and has concealed it in his under his in the bed where his wife is expecting a baby. And you wonder. I mean, you wonder. Well, how are we going to get from this to the Nativity? These are the shepherds, who are going to go visit the Christ child. Well, it does happen.
As
in
I
the
remember,
last scene.
it's done by an angel. It's done by a miracle.
Yeah.
An angel appears and says, "Hey, you fellows," and they instantly change.
Yeah, they all and worship the child.
The minute they see the angel, everything changes.
It's almost. I mean, people have noticed it. This sheep that they pretend is a baby. See, then they pretend that the sheep is a baby, and they discover it, of course, and they throw old Mac, the scoundrel, up in a blanket. It's really rollicking farce is what it is. And there's even almost a little kind of reference to the kind of almost a little parody of in the childbirth and all that sort of thing, and she's expecting the baby, and instead they have the lamb, and it's you think, gee, it's almost seems like you might even think it's a little blasphemous or something,
because it sounds like the Lamb of God.
Yeah, it does.
Who taketh away the sins of the world, and they certainly knew that.
Oh yes.
They
Certainly. And
that kind of thinking, that kind of analogical thinking, was much more common to them than it is to us.
Oh yes.
So they didn't do that without, and the whole audience would have known it.
They knew what was coming, of course, but you only get the Nativity in the last scene of the
That's right.
play. The rest of it is just
And yet,
sheer farce.
So reverent at the end. They all take off their hats
yes,
and they stand there.
Yeah.
And
They make long speeches to the baby, to the Christ child. It's very touching.
And actually, it's a touching play.
Mm-hmm.
Tears.
Tears
come to your eyes when you see that play, or even when you read it. That's comedy, serious comedy, and it's all through.
See, these shepherds who are just a bunch of roughnecks, don't know anything. They of course are seriously religious men and women. They're not they're rough. They're ordinary people. They're ignorant. They don't know anything at all.
They admit their sins. They see right away that this child is so pure, and so good, and so holy. And we are such scoundrels. We're all scoundrels. That's and also we're poor. There's a great deal of that, I think.
And they complain about it.
The reason why he steals the sheep is he has no money.
Yeah. And of course, to steal a sheep is a big thing because the shepherds don't have any money either,
right.
and they're all and they complain about the landlord. They're all going around complaining about how mistreated they are and all that sort of thing.
There's a lot of the sort of Franciscan feeling of the poor and the goodness of being poor in itself.
And they're the point is they don't have the tragic spirit. As I say, they complain.
No.
They complain about being poor, and they complain about their lord, the landlord, and they complain about being cheated and all that kind of thing. But they do not have the tragic spirit at all.
There's difficult distinctions. One of the most famous forms use the word complaint, and one of the most famous literary forms of the Middle Ages, of the Christian times, is the complaint.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's a love poem where the lover complains that that his love is not accepted and he's bereft and so forth. And the complaints are melancholy in tone. They're very sad. They're tearful, and yet they're not tragic. What is the difference? Because normally people would say, well, tragedy is being sad and comedy is being happy. Well, it's more complicated than that. We have to sort that out. The essence of the tragic spirit, I think, is this: that God is malevolent. the author of tragedy sees a flaw in the universe beyond sin. And in fact, he doesn't believe in sin. He believes it's God's fault.
Yeah, he blames God for not having made the world right. See, if God had done his business right, we wouldn't have things.
Sin never would have happened.
Things wouldn't have gone.
Why didn't he make Adam right? Why did he invent the serpent? Why? I was reading a popular novel the other day, and there's a very, very funny remark in it that a character makes. He takes his son out into the night. They're out on a winter night, and the son asks his father, who is a science teacher, and he says, "Gee, Dad, where is the North Star?" And his father says, "Well, you see, now you can find it." And he starts explaining to him, and the young fellow says, "Well, gee, that's awful hard to find." And his father says, "Yeah, I've often thought they shouldn't have made it that way."
There should be a big sign up there that points North Star here, like a big finger that points in the sky.
But the whole notion is that really the universe is a machine that was designed, mechanically, and they shouldn't have made it.
Yeah, why did God make it all so complicated
Right.
instead of just giving us all the answers? It should have come with an owner's manual.
Right.
That's
exactly.
The world should have an owner's
Well,
manual.
that's the tragic complaint, is that God himself is malevolent, I think is the word you have to use. That is, there is an evil intention in the creation itself. In other words, theologically, it goes back to the perennial heresy. There really is only one heresy. If you trace them back to their metaphysical roots, all heresies can be reduced to that one, that God is evil. And I think you can see it very strongly in the Gnostics, and especially the Manichaean varieties, but it recurs again and again and again. Now, I don't say directly that you can attribute that to the theologians of the Renaissance, of the Reformation, but John Calvin didn't say God is evil, but he certainly acted as if the creation was evil. Everything God did was evil. And I think now, here again, I don't want to be inaccurate because I don't really know much about it, but from my popular understanding of it, doesn't Calvin really teach that God is the author of evil? That is, in some way, he's responsible. If he doesn't give you the grace, you're going to be evil. And therefore, in a way, it is God's fault. Evil people can say in a Calvinistic system, "Well, it's not my fault. I'm not one of the elect."
Yeah, God didn't choose me.
Yeah.
So I am damned.
Yeah. Yeah. God damns certain people and saves others, so that He is the author of damnation.
Well, and that whole idea, the whole idea of predestination, that is that certain people are predestined to hell. This is of course the term itself is used by Catholics as well.
But this is an
the
extreme
Calvinistic
interpretation
is that they are doomed, and that idea of doom and that the gods are responsible for doom goes back to the Greek tragic.
It's that fate and the tragic. That was the tragic spirit in Greece. That is, we talked about this before when we talked about Greek tragedy. That in Homer, the universe is essentially good. There's a marvelous speech at the beginning of the second act of As You Like It. The Duke has been, incidentally, I always like this play because he has my name, Duke Senior. But it's not all that common a name, and it's always shocking to see it. He may very well have meant nothing more than
that he is the senior Duke.
Senior Duke, rather, junior, senior. We really don't know. But the Duke has been exiled by a wicked brother. And he's fled to the forest, and he's living a rude life, almost like a primitive man. And the first time we meet him is at the beginning of Act 2. We've heard about him all through Act 1, but now we move to the forest, and he appears with this speech. "Now, my co-mates and brothers in exile, hath not old custom made this life more sweet? than that of painted pomp? Are not these woods more free from peril than the envious court? Here feel we not the penalty of Adam, the season's difference, as the icy fang and churlish chiding of the winter's wind, which, when it bites and blows upon my body, e'en till I shrink with cold, I smile and say, this is no flattery. These are counselors that feelingly persuade me what I am. Sweet are the uses of adversity, which, like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head. And this our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. Well, that's, of course, a famous, justly famous speech, and a lot of people quote the one phrase, sweet are the uses of adversity, which is true, and Christian. But I was thinking of that last phrase, good in everything. Duke Sr. in this play really believes that. He really believes that no matter what happens, and he's lost his realm, his dukedom, he's been exiled, he's been separated from his beloved daughter, he's been forced to live in poverty, he who had been a very wealthy man, I mean, everything has been taken away from him. And so he's not a man who, it's easy to say that if you've never been tried, but he's been tried, and he really believes that.
Yeah, well, he's living a better life.
And
he says he has discovered something through this experience. He's discovered that this is a better life.
Hath not old custom made this life more sweet?
He speaks of the envy of the court, and that's so true in this play especially, and as I think we pointed out in all of Shakespeare, that the court is a place where envy flourishes. In this play, Oliver envies his brother Orlando. Notice the names. This is Oliver and Orlando, Olivier and Roland. You know, remember from the Song of Roland. Here they're brothers, and there's a rift between them. And the older brother Oliver, he sees that his younger brother is noble. Roland, Orlando is a noble and gentle young man, and Oliver resents it. He's envious of his own brother, and so he eventually drives him out, and he goes to the forest. But early on in the play, in Act 1, Scene 1, in fact, the wrestler comes in, and Oliver asks, where will the old Duke live? And Charles, the wrestler, says, they say he is already in the forest of Arden. That's where most of this play takes place, is in Arden, which may be the Ardennes forest in Belgium, possibly. And many merry men with him, and they live like the old Robin Hood of England. They say many young gentlemen flock to him every day, and fleet the time carelessly as they did in the golden world. And that's, of course, exactly what
old custom. That's the golden world.
Yeah, the golden world. They fleet the time carelessly as they did in the golden world. He's talking about the gold, the old golden age.
Shakespeare is haunted by the golden age.
Golden age, yes.
Well, civilization is haunted by the golden age.
Yes. And it is this place. It's the forest of Arden, wherever that is, whether it's the Ardennes or whatever it is. It's the woods. It's the simple life.
And the court. Now this is very important. The court is the place physically where tragedy occurs. That is, the literary form of tragedy does not occur anywhere else. It's a city thing.
Yeah.
In Greece, for example, there was no tragedy until Athens became a court. There was an oligarch, well, not an oligarchy necessarily, can be a democratic court, but nonetheless a courtly life with a law, with a civil law that can be enforced. The court is what generates the tragic spirit, because there it is. Everything is made by man, for one thing. You lose contact with nature. The Duke in this speech talks about the winner's wind, and that theme, again, runs all through the play. At the end of the act, there's a famous song. You can see it right at the end of Act 2.
Right at the end of Act 2, yeah. Blow, blow, thou winter wind, thou art not so unkind as man's ingratitude. Thy tooth is not so keen because thou art not seen, although thy breath be rude. Hi ho, sing hi ho unto the green holly. Most friendship is feigning, most loving mere folly. Then hi ho the holly, this life is most jolly. Freeze, freeze, thou bitter sky, thou dost not bite so nigh as benefits forgot. Though thou the waters warp, thy sting is not so sharp as friend remembered not. Hi ho, sing hi ho unto the green holly, most friendship is feigning, most loving mere folly. Then hi ho the holly, this life is most jolly. That's a perfect embodiment of this comic spirit, that song.
That song is the greatest thing ever written. Right now, I'm convinced. That's absolutely the greatest thing. It certainly sums up the whole play. Even more certainly this theme that we were talking about. But all comedy. And the whole spirit of Christianity is in it.
Yes, the most friendship is feigning, most loving mere folly. That is a sharp criticism of the two
Solomon didn't
greatest things.
Couldn't say it much better.
No. I mean it is that recurrence of vanity, that all things are vanity. But there's that sharp sting as a friend remembered not, ingratitude, that serpent's tooth that King Lear talks about, that ingratitude. Oh, how common that is in the court, and how often in the court is friendship feigned.
You remember Shakespeare again is haunted by that. The famous et tu, Brute. That is what astonished Caesar was not that his enemies were going to kill him. He knew enemies. He was prepared for that.
Yeah, but Brutus
was his best friend.
Yes, he says then falls Caesar because Brutus was his friend. He had done marvelous things for Brutus. He had forgiven Brutus for being on the other side in the war, and he had taken him as a kind of son, and given him all sorts of favors. And this was what he got in return. There's the court for you. And of course in Shakespeare,
that is the tragic spirit. That is, I think, what you have in Caesar at that moment is the tragic spirit. Then fall.
Yeah.
That is, friendship is fame. Therefore, die. Which is not what Amiens here, the relatively minor character in the play, sings here in this great song. The astonishing thing, one of the astonishing things about this song is the juxtaposition of the bitterness of wind and the freezing, and then the court, which is even worse, and then suddenly the conclusion from that. Well,
yes.
Hi ho.
Hi ho the holly. This life is most jolly, he says. Now I think that Amiens is this life that they're living right here in the forest. This life is.
We don't want to go back to the court.
Amiens, earlier at the end of that speech, Amiens makes a comment. He says, I would not change it.
Right.
I wouldn't exchange this life, he says, for another life. He says, happy is your grace that can translate the stubbornness of fortune into so quiet and so sweet a style.
That's a beautiful comment on that great speech.
Yes,
I
certainly
would not
is.
change it.
Yeah.
Amiens, as I said, he's a relatively minor character, but he's one of those minor characters who plays a a great role in literature. He reflects a little bit like Horatio to Hamlet. He reflects. He comments on what
Right.
Chief.
Well, he's a singer. He's a singer. He's French. He's given a French name, and he has a.
He's a troubadour.
He sings. Yeah. He sings. He has a beautiful voice, and so he.
He sings a lot. This play is full of song.
You know who played. Remember who played Amiens? There's a production. I have his book here.
Oh.
One of our students played
really?
Amiens in the play. It was Steve Gooden.
Really?
Steve Gooden. Yes,
Really?
he did. Steve Gooden had a good voice.
Yes, he did.
He had a good voice, and he played Amiens. I have. And for some reason, I wound up with his version here. I got his name and his telephone number in front of the book.
An old book
with all sorts of notes about what it costs to go to Kansas City to Lawrence on the bus, and he has crossed out things that they excluded from the play, and he has prompt notes in here about what he's supposed to do when all of this action is going on.
They used to play here.
At KU on the stage.
Yes,
I remember seeing.
Steve does have a good voice.
Yes.
In fact, he's an actor.
Yes.
He's
He's
an actor.
Yeah, it was very good. Very good. But that's. As I say, that's right. He's one of those characters that reflects.
He doesn't say it. I mean, he has very few lines in the play. But that's needed. That is somebody who says more or less, that's right. What you just said was right.
Yeah.
That's most important for the audience. And he says it perfectly there. That is, I would not change it.
Well, in fact, this play, as Mr. Senior says, is just filled with songs, and Amiens sings them. He has another one in Act 2, which is very simple. He says, and Winter comes in again. In Act 2, scene 5, right at the end of that scene, he sings a song for Jaques, and he says, "Who doth ambition shun, and loves to live in the sun, seeking the food he eats, and pleased with what he gets. Come hither, come hither, come hither. Here shall he see no enemy, but winter and rough weather." It's another lovely song. I guess I really read you the second. I read you the second verse. Scene 5 starts with the first verse, which is, "Under the greenwood tree, who loves to lie with me and turn his merry note unto the sweet bird's throat. Come hither, come hither, come hither. Here shall he see no enemy, but winter and rough weather."
The lyric perfection of those things is just unbelievable. There isn't anybody in the world who can do that as well as Shakespeare.
Well,
when he's at his best, it's the best.
High ho holly is just like come hither, come hither, come hither. Of course, come hither into this green wood. That's where you should come. But it's more than that.
It's what the bird says.
Yeah.
The bird cries, "Come hither, come hither." I know Robert Frost has a poem which is obviously written with this in mind, a rather sardonic and ironic poem. Do you remember it? Because I can't recall it all, where a bird calls to him. He hears this bird, and Frost very ironically says, "I would go with him, but I wasn't invited."
Oh, yeah.
The oven bird, is it? Or,
the oven bird.
I think he calls it the oven bird. I wish I could quote the lines. If Mr. Nellick were here, he'd quote the whole poem. I can't remember. But it's well, Frost was touched with the tragic spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So he's a very good poet, and he knew this whole tradition, but he was touched with that bitter irony. Frost, at least, if he wasn't tragic, he was in doubt about it.
Yeah, he was on the edge. But
he said, "I would," as it were, what Frost is saying is, "Well, I would go in to the green wood, but I have not been invited."
Yeah. But that's what the poet says too. Come hither, come hither.
But here, I mean, the poet says you are invited. Yeah.
He invites you in. Right. It's a marvelous phrase. There's at the beginning of Howard Pyle's version of Robin Hood, there's a marvelous prologue, absolutely marvelous prologue, in which he invites the reader to come with him into the forest, come with him to live with Robin Hood. And that spirit of Robin Hood, in fact, is part of they're outlaws. Robin Hood is an outlaw. He's lost everything. He's been unjustly deprived of everything. He's very much like the old Duke here. He's lost everything, and he finds a better life. He finds a freedom there.
And Howard Pyle was saying the same thing to us.
Yeah, exactly.
Howard Pyle wrote that book, of course, in our century.
He has a funny remarks about. Now I know you people are very serious. You people are very serious, and you want to stick to your business and all that sort of thing. But it's an invitation to leave that world, that dreary world that you are all stuck in, and come into the world of Robin Hood.
Mr. Quinn and I have been involved rather seriously in children's literature over the last years, because I guess the reason we got into it in the first place was that we realized that our students hadn't read it, and that it really is prerequisite to adult literature. Because if you haven't read Howard Pyle's Robin Hood, you're really not ready to be reading Shakespeare's As You Like It. It's a book that you should read when you're quite young. It's a book that can be read aloud to children when they're 6 or 7 years old.
And be sure you read the Howard Pyle version. It's beautifully written
and illustrated.
Yeah, illustrated.
He was also a very gifted illustrator. In fact, more famous, I guess, as an illustrator, but still a very good
Very
writer.
good writer.
Very good writer. And that a child can read by himself when he's 10, 12.
Oh, yeah. Although it's hard. It's
hard. It's better to read it aloud.
It's an antique language. He's written it in an antique, medieval-like English.
Yeah. I think a child could handle it by himself if he's a bright kid.
Yeah.
When he's 10 or 12. But better read aloud around the fireside.
It's marvelous.
And that, the reason I was reminded through your mentioning Pyle of this whole controversy, I was reading some statements made about Kenneth Graham, whom we were talking about before the tape went on. He was another great children's book writer, for younger children than Robin Hood. But Kenneth Graham would understand everything we're saying, exactly the same thing. That is, his most famous book is called Wind in the Willows, and it's under the greenwood tree, except for younger children. It deals with animals instead of men. Mm-hmm. But the same invitation is there. That has come. The child reading that book goes right into the world, and it's a better world. It's a beautiful world. And in the silly second part of the book, the adventures that the animals have in the bottom world is all disastrous.
Yeah, well, they go to the city. You see, one of them gets interested in automobiles. The toad gets interested in automobiles, and he gets into court. Literally, that is not the legal court. Yeah. He gets into legal court, which is they arrest him and they throw him into jail because he's enamored of the automobile. He gets caught up in the modern world, loses his grip on the
everything he learns is he wants to go home. I mean, I think the comeuppance of the book is, why did I ever stray into this court?
Yeah.
And I was reading The Modern Critic, a very bright, smart modern critic, who has written on Kenneth Graham, and he says, of course, Kenneth Graham is a great writer. We all admit how beautifully he writes, but he was a part of that decadent and silly Victorianism of the John Ruskin variety, who really thought that they could irresponsibly, he said they're irresponsible. That's the word he uses. Morally irresponsible. Because they wanted to leave the real problems of the world and retreat into a fantasy about the Middle Ages or about, in Graham's case, nature. Yeah. But he identifies quite accurately the whole milieu that Howard Pyle and Kenneth Graham come out of. But it isn't Victorian, because here it is in Shakespeare.
Kenneth Graham he worked in a bank for a long part of his life, and he finally quit. He did his work. He didn't complain. He did his work. He went to work every day, but he finally quit and moved to the country and bought himself a house and in the country and lived there for the rest of his life, and lived in relative, under very moderate circumstances, and wrote The Wind in the Willows. That's what he did.
And that story is multiplied. Beatrix Potter did the same thing.
Well, she lived there her whole life.
Yeah,
she
yeah.
she never left it. Really, she never left it.
And she preferred it to
yes.
to her fame and fortune as a writer. She, in case you don't know her name, she's the authoress of, of all things, Peter Rabbit. It's hard to believe that Peter Rabbit had an author, let alone an authoress. But he did, and she's a remarkable woman. But it's the same story. The minute she was able to get away from her family, she bought a farm and married a
sheep rancher. And then she quit writing. By gosh, she
cared
preferred. No, she didn't care about her
she cared
literary
about the
fame.
farm.
She became very famous, and when she got married, she dropped out of sight. She didn't want to talk to any reporters or anybody who wanted to talk about her writing or anything, and she wrote almost nothing more after that.
We could multiply famous modern examples of this. Thomas Hardy, for example, who didn't write children's stories, he wrote bitter, pessimistic, ironic novels. But the same thing, that is, as soon as he made enough money from writing his novels, he moved back to his childhood country and spent the rest of his life living in a kind of deliberate isolation, and went back to writing poetry. Here it is. I mean, the whole impulse for that is summed up in these songs. Under the greenwood tree, who loves to lie with me and turn his merry note unto the sweet bird's throat. Come hither, come hither. We didn't mention come hither.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a famous anthology by Walter de la Mare of poetry, and it's one of the best anthologies there is, maybe the very best one, and it's an anthology of mainly of lyric poetry. It doesn't include every kind of poetry, as de la Mare knows. But that's the title of it. Well, that's a brilliant stroke.
I know you and I talked about this once before, and you thought, well, it wouldn't be right to say that he took it from here because the phrase is everywhere. I mean,
exactly. Yeah, you find it all over the place. You find in Shakespeare, you find people saying that
in every other
in
every other play. Yeah. But still, it isn't accidental. Let's put it that way. That it is found in these two great places. And Walter de la Mare, again, is primarily known as a children's writer. He wrote, of course, he was a considerable poet, just under any definition of that word. But he was read aloud to children a great deal because his poems are so simple, so readable, and they're very, very good. Not great, but very, very good. But again, the whole point of that anthology is there is, he calls it an other world. He's rather platonic about it. He calls it the other world. But it is a better world than this. Quite clearly.
And it's a real world.
It's a real world.
It's not an unreal world. It's a real world.
It's a world of nature.
It's the world that poetry really deals with. Yes. That is poetry. Now, not all poetry is there. Again, there's no tragic poetry. I don't.
Well, see, when you said he doesn't include everything, that's precisely what he doesn't include.
Yes, he doesn't include tragic poetry. No, it's all bright and fresh.
A lot of it's sad.
Yeah, there's sadness, certainly.
But it's all full of
well, it's that fundamental...
Everything is good.
Yeah, that fundamental acceptance of the world as being good, despite all of the appearances to the contrary. And indeed, the appearances to the contrary often prove to be the very things that reveal that goodness in the world.
Isn't that what the Duke says?
Yes, that's exactly what the Duke says.
He says those are the uses of adversity.
Yeah.
Sweet are the uses of adversity. That is, this bitter wind. Now I've lost my place. He calls it a counselor. He says these are counselors.
They're not flattering counselors like the counselors you have in court. They don't lie to you. The wind does not lie to you. It tells you the truth. That is, it tells you that you're mortal.
The truth about yourself, he said. That's it.
It tells you.
Tells me what I am.
What I am.
He says that feelingly persuade me what I am. Isn't that wonderful?
And they tell him he's a man, you see, and that he's subject to cold.
In all fairness to women. And I guess I'm reminded of our old friend John Ruskin, who just was appalled at saying things like that. That is why embroil women in anything as disgusting as this stuff. Now, it may be that somebody has to do it. It may be we need a court. Let's be realistic. It may be that we can't all go under the greenwood tree. It may be that that can't be done. That it is a better life, but after all, at a certain degree of history, that it's impossible. And so we'll need a government.
Well,
but let's do it reluctantly.
Shakespeare talks about, in Henry V, he talks about, how heavy the head is that wears a crown, the responsibilities that are put upon the king. Everything is put upon the king. That's the way it has been too.
Remember, Socrates says the same thing.
Yes,
in the
exactly.
Republic.
Yeah.
He says, why would anybody want to take this burden upon himself? Well, because you love your fellow man. And if you have the gift for doing it, other people will thrust it upon you. He says you'll never seek it yourself. But it may be that it will be thrust upon you. If you read over the lives of the saints, if you go through the old Catholic breviary, how many times, it's almost conventional, it is conventional, in the lives of the popes who have been saints, that they fled. They wouldn't, St. Gregory the Great, for example, they couldn't find him. He ran into the woods. He hid when he found out that they wanted to make him pope. They had to drag him out and force or with bishops, the same thing. They all, St. Albert the Great didn't want to be made a bishop. Oh, no, that's anything but that.
And St. Thomas, they want to make him an abbot, and he didn't want to do that. He refused. He said, I'm too young. He used excuses. He said, no, you can't. I can't do this to me. I won't accept.
And I guess we can drive it back to the Old Testament. Moses said the same thing to God. When the angel speaks to Moses and says, take off your shoes, this is a holy place, Moses is certainly in awe, but he's not above saying no to God. He's not, well, God, I'm not able to do this. And our Blessed Mother herself questions the angel on that.
How can this be? She says.
So somebody has to do these things, but it's always done with that sense of the minimum and of the reluctant. One of the great heroes of Western civilization is the Roman plowman Cincinnatus, you remember, who was a farmer. And when somebody or other was sweeping through Italy, I forget whether it was the Etruscans or the Gauls or who it was, but somebody was marauding and destroying the young republic. The people come to Cincinnatus, knowing by instinct that he was a natural leader, saying, come, you must lead us into battle. And Cincinnatus refuses to do it. And they force him. They say, you have to do it. Well, all right, he does. And he does, and he wins the battle, and as soon as it's over, he goes back to the farm. And George Washington, our greatest American, certainly self-consciously, knew that story. Certainly knew that story.
Oh, no, everybody
knew that. Every schoolboy knew that story because it was always taught in schools. He did the same thing. He refused the crown. And there was nothing hypocritical about it. He went back to the farm. You can repeat that story over and over and over again.
Yeah, one of his most famous speeches is his farewell speech. That's what you remember. He was
farewell address.
His farewell address.
That is ambition and all of those things.
Well, that's that word, ambition, envy, and ambition. Oh, how conscious Shakespeare is of ambition and the destructiveness of ambition, the desire to be a great man, to rule and have power and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, you wonder about Shakespeare, and how did he know all those things? Do you suppose he had it himself? He didn't have ambition in a political sense, but in the artistic sense, that he really did know how great a man he was?
I don't know.
We don't know.
It's hard to believe that he didn't. No.
Certainly, that's one of the ways that he attempts to interpret it.
He doesn't have the reputation of. He did not have the reputation of being a boastful man. Now, Ben Jonson did have the reputation of being a boastful man, and I think he deserved it. He thought he was a great poet. He admired this side idolatry. He says Shakespeare. he doesn't hesitate to criticize him, which is right. He should have criticized
But he
him.
certainly loved him.
Yeah, but he loved him, as he says. He loved him, and he did. But Johnson was an egotistical man, and he did have that
Well, he
ambition.
did a comparison with
With Shakespeare
and with the Romans, and with
oh,
Seneca.
yes,
And,
yes.
I can't again. My memory is just terrible. But Johnson has lines in his poems where he actually dares, the Roman poets.
Yes, yes. Well, he published his
As good as
works. He had his works published during his lifetime, and everybody just laughed at him. They said, that's ridiculous. In the first place, to publish poems
Who do you think you are?
call them works. I mean, who are you anyway? I mean, we only give works to the names of great theologians and philosophers. We don't give it to the names of poets.
Opera omnia.
Yes, it was ridiculous. Everyone ridiculed him for doing that, and it was pretentious of him to do it.
Especially since a lot of them were epigrams and
Yes,
nonsense poems and everything else. Although he did write his tragedies and his, he certainly dared the comparison with the
Oh, he dared comparison, at least with Seneca.
Right. And John Milton does the same thing, for example.
Yeah.
Milton was very self-conscious of his own greatness.
Yes.
And Dante was very self-conscious. We know that about Dante.
There's no evidence, outside evidence of Shakespeare being like that.
But he seems to be troubled by it.
The
Tempest is the best evidence.
Yeah. But he does tend to ridicule poetry. In his plays,
He does right in this play.
he laughs
Oh,
at
yeah.
poetry. Well, in this play, right after this
Orlando's poem.
this magnificent song, if it's this may be the second greatest song, blow thou winter wind, freeze thou bitter sky, he says, and he goes on, and wait a minute, I guess I'm.
I think it is in that. Where does Orlando appear and start reciting his love poems? Because
Well, I'm thinking.